I don't know if you know, pandemic is over. And how do I know it? Because Joe Biden, the president of these United States, said so on TV. Here we go.
Mr. President, first Detroit Auto Show in 3 years.
Yeah.
Is the pandemic over?
The pandemic is over. We still have a problem with COVID. We're still doing a lot of work on it. But the pandemic is over. If you notice, no one's wearing masks. Everybody seems to be in pretty good shape. And so I think it's changing, and I think this is a perfect example of it.
So, by the way, immediately, Biden's declaration tonight that the pandemic is over was not part of his initial planned remarks and caught several of his own health officials by surprise, per two sources, and they've already started walking it back. When he said the pandemic is over, he didn't mean medically. He just meant it's not cool anymore. It's like, that pandemic, it's so over. I think that's how he was saying it. So he's causing a lot of stir by saying that. That the pandemic is over. So what we want to go is from a pandemic to an endemic. And no one really knows when that happens. So if you're looking for a scientist to tell you, nobody can tell you when that happens. You know when it happens? When people decide it happened. When people decide to start living again their lives instead of being in fear of a virus that has a mortality rate, a death. Most people who are over the age of life expectancy that die from this, and they have 4 comorbidities. So if you want to still run around being afraid of this virus for the rest of your life, you're welcome to. But even Demented Joe is telling you the pandemic is over.
Yeah.
And immediately Ron DeSantis said Biden declared the pandemic is over. So when will he let those discharged from the military due to the vax mandates return to protecting our country? When is he going to let those New York hospital state workers go back to work? New York just fired 1,000 more hospital workers. I just got a text. Let me read this text. Make sure I'm not making this up. Yeah, this is from Ethan Klein. He says New York City just fired almost 1,000 more teachers and aides for being unvaccinated. Please don't be desensitized to the horrific discrimination that's still happening. Wow. They're still doing that. And that's not based on science. So they like to wag their finger at MAGA and Florida and Texas for not following the science. New York is not following the science, and they have never have followed the science. None of them. And Andrew Cuomo's a murderer. Which is way worse than you could say about DeSantis or Abbott or anybody else. Andrew Cuomo should be in jail for murdering people. Let me bring in my panel. What do you think? Is it over?
Go ahead, Jackson.
I just find this interview incredible because you got to imagine they probably did like 50 takes of this single interview for 60 minutes. But even then, directly after the interview airs, I see like 3 different articles right off the bat from the White House press secretary saying, well, that's not exactly what he meant about Taiwan. That's not exactly what he meant about the pandemic. It's like, well, what does he mean? How can you guys not get a coherent message out there? Who knows? Who knows what this means? We clearly know what's going on with COVID, but who knows what they're going to tell us next?
Yeah. And did you hear what he said right after? The pandemic's over, but we still got a lot of work to do, which means the national emergency still exists, right? The public health emergency still exists, which is coming from the HHS, which means the money in the gravy train keep going. If you're not paying attention to what's going on in the WHO right now, they're trying to still amend their international health regulations and bring in this treaty where they can take global control by splitting up the world into regions. And anybody who's participating in the WHO and part of this treaty or part of these regulations has to give over their sovereignty. Their constitution is voided so that they're called FERCs, the regions, where the WHO will then take control of the country and decide what to do in the case of another pandemic. So all this stuff is still going on. Not to forget in your backyard, gentlemen, because now I live in Vegas because I got the hell out of California. draconian, crazy laws are still in play. They have that kind of Julian Assange law where they're being able to take disinformation people down, including doctors, and punishing them by taking away their medical licenses. And they're still trying to push the 12-year-old is allowed to get the vaccine without his parents knowing whatnot. That stuff is still in play. So this is far from over, and they're going to continue to censor everybody out there. And like you mentioned, still the federal workers are still obligated to get the jab or they get fired. A lot of people in the medical industry. We still have those SEALs and people in the military who are still fighting this. So even though they say it's over for political gain, so they get the people out there that will go and vote for them, behind the scenes and really just on paper, there's a lot of stuff still going on where COVID is far from over.
Well, friend of the show, Dr. Aaron Curity says President Biden announced on 60 Minutes that the pandemic is over. I concur, it has long been over. But why then is the president continuing the national state of emergency? Is it because the president gains access to an additional 136 statutory emergency powers? Or is it to support the emergency use authorization vaccine medication gravy train? I think it's both those things. Yeah. Or is it the Medicare payment to hospitals for every identified COVID case gravy train? Or the PCR testing bonanza? Either the emergency is over or it's not. Can't have it both ways just for political maneuvering. Well, that's exactly what they're doing. But just, hey, cut Joe Biden a break. He doesn't even know which way to walk off stage after a speech. You'd expect him to figure out all this pandemic stuff too? Come on.
You know, Jimmy, there's still like 30 national emergencies still going on. And in the case of a national emergency, Congress is supposed to meet every 6 months in a joint session to discuss what's going on so the public can know. They haven't done it once since he signed over, since Trump, started the national emergency, Mr. Operation Warp Speed guy. And you just mentioned something that's so important because all these other gravy trains still going. I'm calling it the testing industrial complex. I mean, it's crazy, but get on a plane to go here, you got to take a test. You got to do it over there. You got to do it here. There's still places that you're obligated to take a test. They're sending all these tests to everybody's home. Somebody's paying for that. Yeah, we are. So there's so much money the gravy train is running and everybody's still getting greased. So they're not going to stop it.
Friend of the show, Dr. Jay Bhattacharya, says President Biden is right. The pandemic emergency is over. Research for better treatment should continue, but the lockdowns, restrictions, and fear-mongering need to stop. History will remember poorly those in public health who have been blind to the devastating harms caused by the lockdowns. Also, Nicole Sapir, MD, she says, new President Biden said he believes the COVID-19 pandemic is over due to any remaining mask and vaccine mandates should be null and void immediately. Future vaccines, treatments, tests should undergo complete FDA review and not the expedited under the emergency. How can you say the pandemic is over and then still have people getting vaccinated under the emergency use authorization? Those are contradictory, and we all know they're contradictory, but we're being run by gangsters. We're being run by fucking criminals. And that's why he did that. In case you didn't know. Hey, Jennifer Say says, she's a blue check. She says, if the pandemic is over, as Biden declared, just in time for the midterms, she has 3 questions. The first question is, 10 states, including California, Illinois, and Washington, still justify having emergency orders in place. That's because there's an even worse virus out there, Jennifer. It's called MAGA. Her second question is, why in New York can't unvaxxed kids play school and sports? Because we're punishing them. Duh. They're unvaccinated. Now, her third question is, why is Head Start still masking toddlers? Because the point of Head Start is to get a head start on wearing masks for no reason and all other acts of obedience. That's why. But there's some people still, people backlashed against Biden over this, of course.
Nina Turner did.
Nina Turner did? What did she say?
She said, the stats don't lie. We're still in the pandemic. People are still dying. Something like that. No, Nina, the stats have been the same for a year. We haven't been in a pandemic for a year, but the same corrupt, authoritarian policies are what are continuing. That's what's continuing.
Yeah.
This was always a pandemic of the elderly and those with comorbidities. That's who this is a pandemic for, and we should have been using the Barrington Declaration, which is targeted protection to people who are at the most risk. They're still doing blanket. Everybody needs a vaccine. Everybody's at equal risk. We're not at equal. I am not at the same risk as a 94-year-old woman with a bad heart, dementia, diabetes, and another comorbidity. We're not. I'm not at the same risk. Not even close.
Mm-hmm.
Unless you've been drinking a lot of LaCroix.
That's right.
And coconut gin.
So there's people saying they're never going to vote for him over this. And then here's a professional pant shitter, my favorite COVID pant shitter, Walker Bragman.
I was going to bring him up, and and you got it.
This is great. He says Joe Biden has presided over more preventable COVID deaths than his predecessor. Why not just say Trump? Then Trump, precisely because he engaged in this kind of denial. Trump wants fucking credit for the what denial? No, I am sorry to say that COVID is not over. Non-doctor person says. Rocky Bellinger says the current strain of COVID is less deadly than the annual flu. Do you want to shut down the country for something that's less lethal than the annual flu? You are embarrassing yourself, the fear-mongering neolib shit. He says, now I'm not saying that. I'm just reading Rocky Bellinger because I am certainly not going to go against YouTube guidelines and say that the COVID is the flu. I'm not saying that at all. I'm just saying, I'm just reporting on a Twitter fight. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying COVID is way worse than the flu. That's what I'm saying. Yeah. But Walker responds by saying, we had more COVID deaths last month than the flu deaths. And he doesn't ever link.
Never.
There's never a link when he talks about all the deaths that are happening. You know why? Because he's a shitty reporter. Because if he actually was a good reporter, he would fucking look into that bullshit statistic instead of repeating it uncritically. Because that's a bullshit fucking statistic. And, even a pothead comedian in his basement knows that. Yeah. But you know who doesn't? People who consider themselves actual reporters. Do some actual reporting and try to debunk the fucking government's numbers, not repeat them unquestionedly. That's the opposite of journalism, and even a comedian knows that. I'm better at comedy than you, and I'm better at journalism than you. Let's do it. Want to do a third thing?
You're better at tweeting than him too, as well. Because
yes, very much so.
If you look who's giving these statistics, and it's very easy to manipulate these statistics. We've been looking at this from the get-go. Pfizer once had to pay one of the hugest settlements ever for manipulating data to the public. Johnson & Johnson had to pay a huge settlement for giving people mesothelioma in Africa. These are criminal corporate big pharma companies, and these are the same people that all these neo-progressives, or whatever you want to call Walker Bragman and his group right now, that were yelling and screaming at big pharma for Medicare for all for years, and now they've acquiesced and bent the knee.
Now they're unpaid big pharma propagandists, so they don't even they do it gladly. They don't. I mean, that shows you how propaganda works. It worked like a charm. What they're doing now is the equivalent of going, if they're at Jonestown, they would be going back for a refill. That's what they're doing. And if you don't know what Jonestown is, look it up.
Kool-Aid.
That's right. They're going back for a second helping of Kool-Aid.
Hey, if the pandemic is over, does that mean that we're going to get human testing on that most recent jab update, and we're not going to just settle for the testing on 8 mice?
No, that's and people are still pretending that this new bivalent flu shot or a COVID shot is just like a flu shot because they can update it without human trials. They're nothing alike. They're nothing alike. And Walker's one of those guys too. It's all fucking, these guys don't know their asshole from a hole in the ground when it comes to COVID, when it comes to masks, when it comes to vaccines, when it comes to herd immunity, when it comes to leaky vaccines, when it comes to viral escape. They don't know the first thing about anything. I advise people like Walker, to go watch my interview with Dr. Robert Malone. Everything he said in that thing over a year and a half ago now has been proven to be true. And a fucking dumb pothead comedian knew that before you did. Over a year before the rest of the world knew it. Why? Because I wasn't ingesting big pharma propaganda after I got injured by the vax. That's what it took me to wake up. But guess what I did? All my friends continue to put their head in the sand and be gutless wonders. They still don't have a critique. Still don't have a critique of Fauci, of Collins, of Big Pharma, of the boost, even the booster. You know, the head of the vaccine department at the FDA and her number one deputy resigned over the boosters. Still not one video for my good comedy friends about vaccines, boosters, not one critique. The biggest story of their entire life. And they turned into government propagandists for it. The biggest story of their life, and they fucking missed it. They tucked their tail and they ran away from it. Well, guess who didn't tuck his tail and run away from it? This show. I almost referred to myself in the third person.
That's okay. The one question that's all right, Jimmy. The one question I would ask, if I had one question to ask Walker Bragman, because I've asked Walker Bragman to have a conversation come on my show.
And he won't.
He blocked me. No, he blocked me. I don't even know how you got that tweet. You know, because I've been blocked for quite some time. And big ups to Rocky Bellinger over there from Michigan, throwing it out, Rocky B. But the one question, if I had one question to ask these guys, I would say then if these shots or these jabs are okay and the booster's okay, then why do they still have qualified immunity?
That's right.
And leave it at that.
That's right.
My question would be, how have you shilled this hard for Big Pharma but still not gotten a job offer from MSNBC?
That's what they want, Jackson. They want a job.
So here, my friend Megan Maureen says, watching the comedians freak out about Biden saying the pandemic is over is entertaining. They are clinging to the last shred of relevance they felt they had. Don't worry, you can still stand with Ukraine. That's the tweet of the day.
Yeah.
That's the tweet of the day.
Awesome.
Well
that won
said.
the internet.
Well said. It's something to watch people who call themselves lefties crave for authoritarianism. Literally end friendships because I didn't want authoritarianism. It's the weirdest thing. By the way, you're not a lefty anymore. You're a fucking lemming. You're not a lefty anymore. If you go along with mandates, you go along with this without a critique of Fauci, who is a fucking criminal, was a criminal during the AIDS crisis, is a criminal today. Fauci they fucking paid money and invented this goddamn virus in a U.S. biolab. That's according to the chairman of the Lancet study group on COVID-19. So you're still not upset at Fauci, even though it looks like he's the person responsible for funding the invention of the COVID-19 virus? What do you call it when someone invents a problem and then sells you the solution at $100 billion a year? What do you call that? You call that a scam.
Bernie Madoff. That's what I call him.
That's all that is. And why does Big Pharma get to set their own profit margin? Why did we allow them to make $100 billion? Why didn't they just make $1 billion and then we take that other $99 billion and end homelessness? How about that?
Good question. And why does Dr. Fauci still get to be allowed around beagles?
Exactly.
Eaglegate.
Okay, over to Steph.
Okay, so I just wanted to read Nina's tweet that was mentioned earlier.
Oh, let's see it.
So Nina said, "We are over the pandemic. The pandemic is not over with us." Big distinction. All right. Now, there's 3 comments right underneath. So Jesse says, "Ah, so cute. She's doing pharmaceutical industry thing now.
Yes.
Working your way up the ladder, girl. Let's do a war tweet next." Very nice, Jesse.
Nice.
Danos said, "Yeah, maybe you should have supported Force the Vote instead of fighting against it like every other neo-lib and neocon."
Yeah.
And Keith comes back and says, "The cringe level of this tweet is too much." I love that. But then Nina taps in and goes, "Who asked you?" That's it.
That's your Twitter game, Nina?
Yeah.
Who asked you?
Who asked you? All right, back to Jimmy. I thought you would enjoy that.
I have see there are a few people who have a more inflated sense of self, I think, in the world. If you think that's a fucking comeback, holy shit. She tweeted out that stupid video that the Young Turks did about Nina Turner annihilates Jimmy. Do you know that fucking video got ratioed by their own fans, and you can't find a comment underneath that video that supports the Young Turks, Nina Turner, or anybody. They're all just shitting on you at your own network now. At your Jeffrey Katzenberg-owned bullshit, neo-lib shit, Democratic Party supporting network called the Young Turks.
She's unbossed, though.
She is unbossed.
She's unbossed.
Okay, but can I? Okay,
she is so bossed. It's hilarious. Why do you think she said Jimmy Dore says things I can't say? Because she's got a boss.
She's unbossed, and she stays amazing.
Okay, so the comeback, one person came back and she said, "Who asked you?" And Let's Go Brandon said, "Public forum, darling."
What the fuck? Virginia Beach, Richmond, Arlington, San Jose, Miami, West Palm Beach. Go to jimmydorecomedy.com for a link for all the tickets and become a premium member while you're there.